It's barely 30 here.
It's probably, I can't read that, Colin, but it's probably about 35 here in Zurich.
Not focusing, I guess, but 17 degrees in Glasgow.
That's not a heat wave. Okay, you're fine. Maybe you make the right decision.
32 in Zurich.
Apparently, it's only 28 here today. Right now, I mean, it's 8:30, right?
For the folks on the other end of Medico, we're still getting settled in the room. We haven't forgotten about you. Please stand by.
All right. Good morning. Sorry, this took a little while because my mail.app became unresponsive, and it's still unresponsive, and I don't know what that means. Um, so we have a bunch of people in the room, and we have a bunch of people online. I see at least Colin. I think I saw Elliot. So we have, I think, everybody who's on the Rsab except for Jay, who sends us apologies. He isn't feeling well. And we have an agenda that's been published. And as we set this meeting up, thanks for being flexible. Rsab meetings are supposed to be public. We didn't sort of envision when we wrote this stuff during COVID that we would have in-person meetings again for the Rsab. And so we realized that the logistics of having meetings that are open for observation at an IETF sort of pose some challenges in terms of sizing the room. And since we had to have this one during the IETF on short notice, because we realized that otherwise we would have had to wait until September, we needed to shuffle a bunch of stuff. And so we're in this ISG breakfast room where not a lot of observers are going to fit in, but I think we're doing fine at the moment still, and we can grow some. And here we have quite a few people online, which is also great to see. Before we start, I want to sort of, Jay yesterday informed the ISG and IAB that the hiring of the RSCE is going according to the timeline. I think they've finished the first round of interviews. and they were gonna discuss, I think, Thursday this week, what they're gonna do. Now that Jay isn't feeling so great, we'll see if that timeline slips a little bit. But basically, they are going to decide whether they have a candidate that they can go forward with in terms of the hiring process, or if they're going to do a second round of interviews with an expanded group of candidates. And that's all I know. So I wanted to pass that on. As you know, once we have an RCE hired, they will join the Rsab as well, but we can already get started without that. The agenda is published. Does anybody want to bash it? I can't hear you.
You can hand over the initial stuff here for Cindy.
I still can't hear you.
Why? If you want, you can hand over the initial stuff to Cindy now. If you.
Okay, that is an excellent idea.
Yeah.
I will hand over the initial stuff to Cindy. Thanks, Miria.
Okay, hopefully the folks who are on the other end can hear me. The first thing on the agenda is actually bashing the agenda, so I just want to run through these slides real quick so that we can see if there's anything to bash. But there is agenda bash discussing how the Rsab, wants to handle minute approval, discussing how the Rsab wants to set their meeting schedule going forward, the selection of the Rsab chair, or if not actually a selection today, then the process for how you'll do that. A discussion with the folks from RSOC, because they had some points that they wanted to raise for Rsab, and then discussion, this would be a standing item about document approval. There's nothing here yet, but possibly some tooling related discussion here about how we want to handle that in the data tracker. And then the last thing would be another standing item for RPC things to note. And we've got Sandy here, and I think Alice is on the other end of Medico if there's anything that they needed to talk about. So anything to bash on this agenda?
So I have a bash, and so I also invited the chairs of the RSWG to join, and Peter's here, and Ecker said he might try to make it, because we might want to also have a chat with them about how we're gonna actually do the handoff of work from the RSWG to the Rsab. So that's why they're here, and maybe we add that as a quick discussion somewhere. And something's beeping. Anything from remote, from Elliot or Colin? Does that sound good to you?
I'm good with that. It's fine.
Okay, then if there's nothing else to bash on the agenda, the next one is meeting minutes. How does Rsab want to handle approving them? Do you want to do it by email? Do you need, if you would do it the way the IAB does theirs, it's you have one person who explicitly says yes and no objection, then they are considered approved? Or do you want to do something else?
So I think we also we want to publish meeting minutes and not a transcript, right? Yeah.
The meeting minutes can be published as part of it'll be set up in the data tracker, like how interim meetings are,
Yeah.
and you can put meeting materials, so that's where the minutes will go.
Yeah. I think having one person signing up is a good process, at least. Yeah. Also, we are just a handful of people, but still.
I agree, but who? Do we just
No, so,
rotate, or whoever's first?
So on the IAB, it's enough that any IAB member signs up and reads it, but usually it's me.
That works for us as well. Okay, but I think one is fine, right? This is just a sanity check, and typically there's nothing really to check because the secretary is very accurate. Okay, so we'll have basically the first RSAP person that responds to the email you take as approval by the RSAP of the minutes, and then publish them.
And just to confirm that you guys are okay reviewing the minutes via email?
Yes.
Okay,
I don't think we want to get on the chat just for that.
had to ask. If there's nothing else on meeting minutes, then the next thing is the RSAB meeting schedule. Do you want to try and schedule a regular monthly or some other interval meeting, or just schedule them as needed based on stuff coming out of RSWG?
So I'm actually, so this touches the topic a little bit about online meetings or in-person meetings. And I don't think there's like a huge need for in-person meetings. On the other hand, if everybody is in the same city, it's like actually nice to meet in person. I'm not expecting that we will have a very lot documents to handle at the very beginning. But we might want to have some kind of standing meeting to figure out if there are any RPC issues. So like I was thinking about just scheduling a meeting once per meeting cycle at this point, but like I'm not sure what your input is from the RPC side.
For right now, I think once per meeting makes sense. I mean, it may turn out that we want more, but we could, address that as necessary.
Yeah, so I agree that, so I think since we, go ahead, Con.
So, sorry, I was just going to say, do we have a feel for how often the RSWG is likely to meet initially?
I don't, Pete might. What the meeting cadence of the RSWG will be, and how do you see?
We haven't really talked about it, but I've been presuming that we're just doing IETF meetings and mailing list in between for RSWG.
Okay, so I would actually, so I think we should have a meeting at the IETF, because we're also talking about, so the IPC organizes at the moment a separate stream managers lunch, I think it is, right, Sandy? And I think we chatted a little bit, at least Miriam and me chatted, and I think it would make sense to roll that into the Rsab meeting, because it's the same people basically. And we're already talking about IPC production stuff in this group as well. And so having yet another group with meeting with the same people is fine. And if you want to buy us food, you can still do that. But I don't think so. And if we're rolling that in, I think it would make sense, because you guys probably want to have that at the IETF.
Yeah, we can do that. The other thing is, at some point we had tried to move that meeting outside of IETF week to free up some of the leadership time. So it's also possible we could schedule phone, teleconferences or something separate from, if that works.
Yeah.
Or
I think, but if we're doing the Rsab meeting during the IETF, and I think there's some good reasons for that. Also, was thinking up with the RSWG, for example, which is then going to meet that week. I think a breakfast like this, or the lunch slot that we had sort of scheduled in on, I think it was the Wednesday lunches or something, that might then work going forward. And we can, I think, in between, right, as the need arises, as work comes from the RSWG, we can either do online meetings, or we can also just approve things from the RSWG by email, right? I don't see necessarily a need to meet for that. We just need to minute it and announce it.
so one of the things
That all sounds pretty good to me. I think the most important thing to me is that the meetings are properly announced, enough in advance, and that when the RSWG presents the Rsab with a document, that it is handled in a timely fashion. And if we need to meet in order for that if there are issues and we need to meet, then we'll just schedule the meeting.
So the only thing that slightly worries me is that RSAB is explicitly for policy issues, right? So if there are anything where we want to get input from the stream managers about operational things, do we want those to be separate?
I think we can do this as part of this meeting. And if you wanted it to be off the record for whatever reason, right? If it's a sensitive issue that where names need to be named because things are moving slow or something like that, we can have the ability to do this even as part of this meeting. And I talked over somebody from remote, so.
Yeah, no, I think you said it well, Lars. I mean, obviously we should avoid having too many meetings off the record. In fact, none would be a very nice number. But if there are, personnel issues, we are allowed to meet an executive session for that. But let's hopefully aim to not have to have too many meetings. I don't want to, this should be a pretty focused task in most cases. And I just assume have the, one group of meetings, not multiple groups of meetings.
Yeah, I just wanted to add, I mean, it's the same people, so you get the same answer, right? No matter which meeting. And I think this question about how to separate policy from operational stuff, that's anyway something that we need to learn how to handle that. So like if we figure out at any point of time it doesn't work, we can find a different solution.
Yeah, that makes sense. So let's get started, and if it doesn't work, then we'll figure out how to fix it, but it seems like it should work. Then. All right, so basically meeting once during the IETF, slot TBD, usually probably breakfast or lunch, and then additional meetings online as needed.
I guess we won't be able to actually find a fixed slot on Sunday or something, right? Which would make scheduling easier.
Sunday is completely full.
Yeah. So, but we
So
could
for-
try to get a fixed slot one of the mornings or whatever.
Mm.
I do want to raise one issue, which is that the Rsab meeting, as it is open, and it is not part of the IETF, if people want to attend remotely, that they should be able to do so without having to pay a fee.
Cindy, did people have to register to join this Meet Echo? Okay, okay. Yeah, we should figure out a solution, but that's a tooling issue, I think.
Are they attending remotely or just observing remotely? Because the latter is easier to arrange.
Both, because Elliot and Colin are attending remotely because they are Rsab members, and everybody else is observing remotely.
And it is possible that we would have invited Peter St. Andre to present from the RSOC, but as he said in the chat, he's not paying the one-day fee just to do that.
So, but
that-
like,
go ahead.
from a technical point of view, Cindy, we could just schedule this as an interim, right? It doesn't have to be part of the IETF meeting.
Maybe we would need to play around with that. Peter should be able to join us here because I just sent him a comp code because there was an explicit thing for him. So that one is taken care of.
No, but that's a good point, Elliot. We should, for meetings during the IETF week, we need to figure out how people can attend this meeting or observe this meeting without needing to pay the fee. And apologies that we didn't for this instance because we moved it here so on short notice and it fell through the cracks. So sorry about that. And if any of you paid just to be here and not for anything else in the IETF, let us know and we'll figure something out.
More generally, does the fee waiver cover that?
The fee waiver would cover it, but you're not allowed to say that because you're an observer. Sorry.
Also,
Yes.
can I interject? There's been a request in the chat for some of the observers are having a hard time knowing who is speaking in the room. So if people could identify themselves before they speak, that would be helpful. This is Cindy, by the way.
Fair point. This is Lars. Pete?
A question, since RSWG is not formally part of IETF, we had planned on meeting IETF weeks, but is it somehow separate and therefore other members of the community who do not pay an IETF registration fee would be permitted to go to that meeting as if we check in the first place?
I would think for remote attendance, we should probably get the same setup that people don't have to register. But for in-person attendance, like they are actually at the IETF meeting. Right?
I will let you all figure out the appropriate way to handle that. It didn't even occur to me because,
Yeah.
of course, I'm registering for IETF anyway, but that's
Yeah,
probably
it's a
something
good
that should be
point.
dealt with.
I would assume that the set of people that would come to an in-person meeting only to go to RSAB or for observation and maybe to RSWG is probably pretty small. And we can say that if that ever happens, they should contact us and we'll figure something out individually. But I think the default assumption is that if you want to observe here in person during an IETF meeting or attend RSWG in person, you're registering for the IETF in some way.
Yeah, I think it's also fair because they are here, they're using the facilities and the food and whatever, so they can as well pay.
I guess this is Eric. I mean, when you say register, you mean pay a fee?
Yes. Well, because people, so I assume nobody will come just for RSWG.
No, but if you attended virtually, you might.
Yes, so this is only about in-person. Virtual, I think we're gonna try
Okay.
and work out a way to observe RSAP and participate in RSWG without paying
Sure, I have no.
a registration fee. Okay.
Actually, as we're talking about the in-person meeting, and it's not on the agenda, but a question that also came up was like, do we want to do anything at the plenary from this group? Do we want somebody to speak at the plenary usually, or?
Not by default, I would say. Only if there's something to report. And the only thing we could report this time is we met for the first time, which seems, I can put it in my slide deck or something, but
I have a slide.
okay, so fine. But yeah, so if anything ever needs to sort of go to plenary level, we can do that. And also, I guess if something needs to go to IETF announce, that can happen, right? Either from the RSAP or the RSWG. It'll happen like via somebody who has posting rights or speaking rights for the plenary. But by default, I don't think we need to have a report or something like that.
I mean, whoever is the chair should have posting and speaking rights. The chair of this group at the end. Which probably brings us to the next point.
Yes, or they can just tell Cindy to post it for them. But anyway, yeah. Right. So meeting schedule, we settled and we found some wrinkles regarding in person. We figured out what to do about registration. Okay. Chair selection.
So Rsab needs a chair. Do you want to try and do that today? How do you want to do that is the question.
I think we should try to do this today because that was one of the main reasons we're having this meeting. Remind me if the RFC says anything about who's qualified to be the chair. Does it need to be one of the stream representatives or?
Let me look real quick.
Okay, maybe Elliot remembers off the top of his head or something.
I don't. I'm looking too.
Okay. Well, there would be Jay, there would be the RSCE. There's other members on the RSAP that.
So, well, they're ex officio members, but what the RFC said, it just says the RSAB shall annually choose a chair from among its members using a method of its choosing.
Okay, so theoretically it could be others, but I guess realistically it would be one of the stream owners. Is there do we have a volunteer from among the stream representatives to serve as a chair? And Miri and I chatted, and because there's a rollover, at least for the IETF, there's a potential rollover for the IAB representative and for the ISG representative after every NOMCOM cycle. And so I guess we're gonna have to do this sort of as an annual thing after the NOMCOM selections settle, in case the RSAP chair is one of the ones that are cycling, right? So,
I guess,
Yeah.
roll over in March along with the potential leadership rollovers, right?
Yes, it's not only the NOMCOM, it's also just the IAB and the IEHG could decide to just select a different representative in March.
correct. Yeah, that's true. All right, but amongst the current representatives, is there anybody who would like to volunteer to chair the RSAP?
So I'd be happy to do it until March. That's 9 months. That's something I can handle.
So Miria volunteered.
Probably not too much work.
Do we have other volunteers?
Elliot?
I volunteered Colin.
That's not how this works, Elliot. I just heard I volunteer, and then there was a static. All right, so Miria is our only volunteer. Shall we?
Congratulations, Miria.
Select.
I'm also happy to leave the room for 5 minutes if you want to have a discussion.
No, it's not on my account, that's for sure.
All right, so thanks for volunteering and thanks for serving. And we can minute that we selected Miria Kulevind as the RSAP chair.
Yeah, thank you, Maria. I'm very happy for you to volunteer.
Okay, then I can take over the meeting. Yes. I think we went through all the admin stuff. So now we're getting to the fun part, which is the RSOC handover. Do we have Peter with us by now? Oh, sorry. We should. Okay, so yeah, Peter, it's your turn basically.
Hey, sorry, this is Peter Sandra. Yeah, thank you, Rsab folks, for serving and for taking over for basically sort of taking over from what some of RSOC was doing. Two things that we wanted to make you folks aware of as you're getting started. I'll actually switch the order here, I think. So one is John Levine has been serving as the temporary RFC series project manager, and we don't have the RSCE yet, the consulting editor, although we're working on the selection process there. So someone's going to need to oversee John's work. We know how much of a loose cannon he is. No, I'm just joking. You know, there needs to be some sort of management of that role. And I don't know, you know, someone's got to choose when his term will end, hopefully after the RSCE is chosen. So there's some help with some, you know, handovers there and so on. So I just wanted to make the RSAB aware of that need. Related to that is this work that the change management team has been doing. So John serves on that team. This team was authorized at one point by the RSOC and basically works through these day-to-day issues that come up. There are tooling issues. There are, you know, things that are authors request to do things a little bit differently. There's bugs in the code somewhere that come up, and I don't really foresee the RSAB, you know, doing this on a day-to-day basis because a lot of this does not rise to the policy level. Now, maybe someone, especially once we have an RSCE, should be paying attention to this because things will bubble up out of that need to get shuffled off to the RSWG. But on a day-to-day basis, stuff just comes up and we meet every 2 weeks to try to work through issues that come up in the publication process. And I don't know if this team would continue, if the RSAB wants to form a subcommittee, you know, how you want to do this. I have no preference, but someone's got to help work through the day-to-day issues with the RPC. Currently, that's me, John Levine, as the project manager. Me was in my role as the RSOC chair. Robert and Kasara from the tools team, and Alice and Sandy from RPC. And we just talk through stuff that comes up. We also, at some point, were working through a large backlog of issues that had come up over time with RFC 7991 BIS that John was working through. You know, I think that's work will probably get sent off to RSWG at some point once that group is formed and up and running. That's up to the chairs of that group how they want to handle that. But the day-to-day stuff that comes up, someone's got to be paying attention, and I just want to make you folks aware of that as the outgoing RSOC chair. Thank you.
A couple of questions, Peter, and I think I asked you all of them already, but I don't know the answer anymore. So this team, right, that was, as you just said, it was initially set up because there was a big backlog and it wasn't necessarily supposed to be there permanently. But what you're saying is this has proven to be useful and you would like to keep it on a permanent basis?
Not necessarily. What I'm saying is that stuff comes up all the time. A lot of this is tooling related. There's a new version of Wheezy Print, which is, you know, the PDF converter that we use. And, you know, there's some, when do we want to switch to that and so on. So I think some of those issues could be worked out between RPC and the tools team folks to about, you know, XML to RFC things that are happening and Wheezy Print and so on down the line. There are things that come up, that sort of day-to-day publication issues. Well, you know, how are we going to handle, you know, monospace fonts in PDF files and stuff like that? And it's been helpful, I believe, and Sandy can speak to this more directly, but I think it's been helpful for the RPC to have someone to bounce these things around with. Now, and then the other thing that comes up is, well, some of these are they procedural issues for the RPC? Are they policy issues? Could they be policy issues? Could they have policy implications? Those need to bubble up probably to the RSAB. What the mechanism is for that is not clear to me, but I know that we have found it valuable to be able to talk frequently to try to work through stuff that comes up during the publication process with authors.
And the second question is like, what's your commitment here? Would you be available to be still involved, or what's the plan?
Well, I have no official capacity anymore because I'm no longer the chair of RSAC because RSAC has gone away. I'm not a special person. I don't think that, I necessarily need to be involved in these sorts of work, but I think someone needs to do this, and it could be that, once the RSCE is seated, that person can sit on that, help out with those conversations. I don't know. I'm not sure who needs to do that. Speaking personally, I've sort of gotten out of the tech industry, and I'm starting a company with my wife, and this is not really a high priority for me. If people want me to serve, I can continue to do that for a while, and I would be happy to do that. But I'm completely volunteer basis now because I'm focused elsewhere.
No, I was mainly asking because then kind of the remaining people, at some point, John Levine will step down, but he might be around with his expertise, I don't know. But the remaining people are basically the RPC and the tools team, right?
Right.
Okay.
And as I say, I think the RSCE, someone's got to be paying attention to help triage what's policy stuff that needs to get handed off to the RSWG and what's not. And I personally, as I have noted via email, I do not want the RSWG, although I'm not, a chair of that group. I don't think it would be productive for the RSWG to become a center of micromanagement excellence and get involved in every last little jot and tittle of the publication process. Are we going to dot our I's and cross our T's and use a monospace font here versus this font there? Those are publication issues to me, and procedural issues and implementation issues. And I do not think it would be productive for the RSWG, for many respects, to be, getting involved at that level of detail, because things will just grind to a halt, and we still need to get the RFCs published. But again, I'm not necessarily planning to be deeply involved in RSWG either. So this is up to Pete and Eric and other folks who are involved there. But I think personally, we need some sort of team to sort of work through these day-to-day issues, very much, procedural, operational issues that come up during publication process, so that we keep the RFCs flowing, which is the primary goal here. Of course, and do that with quality. Thank you.
Yeah, Elliot, I'm going through the queue. I have a proposal, but we go through the queue first, so you're first.
Okay, so thank you. And thank you, Peter. And I must disagree with you on one particular point, Peter. You are special, but maybe not for the reasons that you were saying. A couple of points. First of all, clearly the day-to-day stuff has to continue to function, right? And there's no reason why the expertise shouldn't be drawn upon for that the RPC needs to function. The way that this was envisioned, I think, is my view of the document that we just created, that Peter, you were the editor of. The way I think this was viewed was that indeed the RSWG should not be involved in the minutiae. I love the way you put it, the center of micromanage excellence. That's not their goal or their role. In general, it's also not the Rsab's role. Right, that's not what we should be doing either. But that doesn't mean there isn't a need for operational discussion. So to that end, right, my proposal, the way this was envisioned, I think, was that the LLC would draw upon the expertise that they need to do the day-to-day job. So my suggestion is that the LLC, Jay and the RPC, bring together the experts that they need to do the day-to-day job. And I'm sure that the people on both the Rsab, some of the people in the RSWG, some of the people on the tooling team will be very happy to contribute to that effort so that things keep moving. And if you have a reasonable mix of people, they'll also help identify to the RPC when the Rsab or the RSWG really does need to be consulted on something. Thank you.
Quick question, clarification question, Elliot. When you say that the LLC should, own this in some form, do you specifically mean the take on the role that the RFC XML style guide change management team has been doing, or do you also mean the oversight over John Levine?
Well, the oversight over the, I guess we should talk about both of those. So actually, I meant neither, as it turns out. What I meant was day-to-day decision-making, whether it has to do with XML and style guide or whatever the case may be. Whatever day-to-day help the RPC needs, they should organize themselves to get that help, right? With whatever assistance the LLC needs to bring to the table, and with whatever, and of course they can consult, whoever they want to consult, and bring in whoever they want to bring in order to manage the day-to-day activities. That was the division of labor. Now, regarding, so that would include whatever XML style guide issues there are, but it would also include anything else that the RPC thinks that they need to address, right? The John issue, I think that's mostly a J issue. And again, in the case of the executive director, he can bring in the people that he needs in order to provide whatever guidance he needs to establish, how John's doing, when the contract needs to end, if it needs to be extended, how, and how the transition to the RSCE occurs. I don't think the Rsab needs to be involved formally at that point, but again, Jay can bring in whoever he needs for this purpose. Does that make sense, Lars?
It makes sense that the contracting side, of course, Jay is going to deal with that, right? I think we're mostly talking about the content of the work, the technical part, and at least I would expect part of the community to sort of maybe be a bit nervous about the LLC or Jay doing that part. I'm fine with if we agree that that's a good thing to do, but I imagine you could make an argument that Jay shouldn't set direction like that. Like, for example, what the XML look like.
I mean, as long as it's within a policy of, if there's a policy violation somewhere along the way, that's an issue, right? But if we haven't specified the policy and the RSWG hasn't specified the policy, I don't know that we have a formal role.
Let's
go to
go
Colin,
to
yeah.
the queue. So Colin.
Hi, I think Elliot said a lot of what I was going to say. It's not clear to me what of the day-to-day things are anything other than operational that should just be handled by the combination of the RPC and the tools team. Obviously, things bubble up to the policy level. The RSAB needs to be involved, or the RSWG needs to be involved, but and perhaps not understanding what needs broader insight.
Perhaps I can provide a little bit of clarification on that. First of all, we've been in a little bit of an interregnum here because we haven't had the RSCE and or the RSCE, and we've been this change management team has been kind of a little bit of a stopgap and not pursuing anything that is remotely policy related because we've been waiting for the new structure to go into place. The things that come up are, look, most things are already handled by existing policies, right? And the RSWG is now thankfully here to handle policy things. If we had some sort of team involving tools team members in the RSCE, let's say, and before that, whoever needs to be there to try to help work through these day-to-day issues, it perhaps would be helpful for me to point to some of the minutes, because this group does keep minutes about what's been going on. But you can see the sorts of issues that come up. This group is very conservative about anything that would potentially impinge upon policy, and has not been working on those things and has been delaying. But of course, the RFCs need to continue to flow. So most things are already handled by existing policies, but style guide issues and so on. I don't have examples off the top of my head about what some of the things are that we've talked about, but we've been meeting every 2 weeks for 2 years or something like that. So there's a large number of kinds of things that we've been dealing with. But these are implementation issues. I do not see these being policy issues. And like I say, the group is very conservative about anything that is remotely policy related. It's going to get bubbled up to someone. And what's envisioned in the RFC in 9280 is that someone's going to work through these things, but if anything seems to be policy related, Rsab is someone from Rsab, more than likely, maybe the RCE at some point, is going to say, hey, this is something that we really ought to raise over in the RSWG. And that was the transmission belt, the mechanism that was envisioned in 9280 to try to get these things handled. But the implementation issues, I'll give you an example. So we have these things we have the source code element in XML, and there's people are always wanting to have new kinds of source code things. Oh, well, these are now, Python code or whatever. And do we add things to the list of the source code types? And does this one seem like it's a good idea to be adding, and this sorts of thing? These are day-to-day implementation issues. And I'm just concerned that the RSAB does not want to be involved in this kind of stuff. And I don't see these things being RSWG issues on a day-to-day basis. Now, if the RSWG says, we really think there ought to be an IANA registry for all these source code types, maybe that's something that gets pursued, and then there's some sort of defined process for adding these things. I don't know, right? That's more of a policy issue. But the day-to-day stuff, it's going to be a waste of time for the RSAB to be paying attention to this every day.
Do you still have a comment? Or?
Oh. So I generally agree with Peter's substantive statement, but I think procedurally it's wrong. Procedurally, the RSAB and other people have precisely the power 9280 gives them, and no more. And so to the extent to which these things they're not charged to do this, then what has to happen is the RSWG has to publish a document enabling them to do this, and in the meantime, nothing happens. And that's I'm sure there are small things that have to be decided, and RFCs will stop if those don't happen, but there are very few of them. And when actually these are things that are minor enhancements to the system and can simply be blocked until the process is created for dealing with them. So the fact that someone wants to do something and that it's too trivial for RSAB to handle does not empower the RSAB to handle it, nor does it empower the RSC to handle it.
Do you still have a comment? Because I want to make a proposal.
Yeah. So
I'm sorry.
So I think I actually do agree with Eka, right? Because the Rsab was specifically set up to be the approval body only, right? And so basically it's questionable whether we can just take on projects independently of getting a mandate from RSWG, right? So I think if there's a desire that these functions be homed here, we would need to be specifically allowed to do that. Because at the moment, we're only supposed to approve things coming from the RSWG.
Not only. So there is something in the RFC saying that there is, if we detect the need for a policy, we should give it into the RSWG.
Sure.
But in the meantime, we can make a decision so things can move on, right?
Right. And my point is that there's a difference between a need for a policy and someone wants to add a new source code type, which simply is not needed. And we know that's not needed because we've gotten this far without doing it. So my point is I don't want minor enhancements to shade into need for a policy.
Yeah. So let me make my proposal. So I think what we have here is, so currently the situation is that this team is chartered by RSOC, but I don't think that's the right setup. But the RPC is, of course, they are free to meet with whoever they want to meet to make things running. And I think with the publication of the Model 3, basically all these operational things went over to full responsibility of the RPC. So I think the RPC should decide if they want to keep the team like that and manage that team. And if the RPC wants to have a liaison from this group to this team, just to make sure that we are able to detect any policy issues and bring them up here correctly, we can do that. But I think the responsibility should sit with the RPC, not the LSC, the RPC, because that's where the operational decisions have to be made now.
So I like that proposal. Sandy, do you like it too?
I think that makes sense, but just to give a little more context here on some of the operational things. So we're not XML experts, right? In particular vocabulary. So some of the things that come up are, is this a bug? Is it a does the vocabulary need to be fixed? Can we use the vocabulary in this way, right? Because you can do workarounds for many things, right? And so we don't want to use something incorrectly. So these kinds of things come up somewhat regularly. And I could imagine us talking to the tools team and John for now, right? And that being sufficient. And if something falls outside of that, then we'll figure out what to do from there.
That sounds good to me. My proposal was exactly like that. You actually organize this meeting in a way that you have the expertise that you need in the meeting. You reach out to the right people and get them in the meeting. If you need any support, I'm happy to help, but it should be your responsibility at the end how you want to organize this meeting.
Elliot, you're in the queue still?
Yes. So two things. First, I agree with the proposal. I just want to, so let me separate these. Let me just say I agree with the proposal. When we finish that, I have an additional comment.
Actually, and then there's a second point about how to handle oversight for John in the meantime. And like I wouldn't be too formal about this. I would just propose to invite John to our meetings as long as he's around in this position, and we can chat about whatever is needed to be chatted about. That's it. I think we're talking about an interim time of like a couple of months probably. So.
Yeah, I mean, as I understand it, John he will be stepping down once we've appointed the new RSCE, so it's a relatively short time frame. I don't think we need to do anything formal for that. Yeah, I would agree that the RPC should have a responsibility for the rest and talk to whoever they feel they need to.
John, does both of this work for you?
I think so. I mean, I think a lot. I mean, there's been a whole lot of stuff over the past couple of years that we basically put on the shelf, sort of waiting for someone to be in charge. I mean, which I would summarize as saying the way XML, what XML to RFC actually does is quite different from what the RFCs say. And there's a great deal of work involved in reconciling, either fixing the code or fixing the documentation to make them work, and going back and reviewing things where neither is quite right, and so I think I know more about that than anybody else at this point, so a certain amount of this is simply dumping in someone else's lap. But my guess is, since it's impossible for me to dump my entire brain at once, there's also going to be a certain amount of overlap. Just it's like, oh yeah, I need to tell you about that too.
Yeah, probably that's a discussion we want to have together with Jay or the LSC and the new RCE as soon as this person is around. So there's definitely more to discuss, I believe, yes. And the other point is also, I don't know, I mean, like independent of the question, like who makes a decision at the end, maybe it's actually useful to run through these issues at some point and just figuring out, because you keep saying that there's a little bit of uncertainty about like where any kind of these things should be decided, how they should move forward. So maybe we could still in this group just like go through the list and figure out if we have like a common view about how to move forward, and not like how to move forward, but in which venue to move forward with certain things. Is that helpful, or would that be helpful? Okay.
I'm sorry to be difficult, but like, really, like this group should not be setting itself up as back to be the RSOC, which is what I fear is happening here.
I was proposing this as a one-time exercise, just like at the very start. So because it feels to me there is a certain uncertainty, and it's just like
Sure, and that
probably
discussion
good
should happen
to-
on
yeah.
RSWG.
And I think it's just good as a group to have like a common understanding about these issues.
Sure, and if this is entirely a briefing, that's fine. But if it's a decision-making meeting, it's inappropriate.
Sorry, say it again.
I said if that's entirely a briefing, that is fine. But if it's a decision-making
No,
meeting,
so that's what I'm proposing. I think the only decision we want to make is like getting a common understanding where the problem should be solved and not finding the solution in this group.
no, I mean,
So-
even determining where the problem should be solved is not a question for this body. It's like,
Yeah,
I need to be
that's-
quite clear on this point.
It's not a question for this body, but I think it's if we sit in the same room and we all have the same understanding, he might be right about it. If there is a lot of disagreement, we have to figure out a way how to find a solution.
Okay, so this is Elliot. First of all, I pretty much agree with what Ecker is saying. And we have to be a little cautious here. And my suggestion is, and it's a suggestion because this body has no ability to direct at this point. It would be really nice if, John, if you were able to lay out these sorts of open issues in a summary to the RSWG, and maybe the RSWG could invite you to do that. I mean, I'll leave it to Ecker and Pete and the RSWG to decide that. But knowing what these sorts of open issues are, I think would be helpful for the community. So that, you know, if we think everything's going swimmingly, and I don't mean we just the Rsab, I mean we as the community, if we think everything's going swimmingly and you don't, we probably want to correct for that. And so to that end, right, I think it's great that you presented this information. Hopefully the RSWG will invite you to present it, and you'd be willing to present it there. Maybe even in, you know, and in what form you present it, you can negotiate with the RSWG. You know, personally, I like reading stuff, but other people may feel differently, right? And it's good, and I want to thank you for showing up here and providing a view. Thank you.
So, I mean, I think we should
Hang on one
just,
sec. I want to do a quick time check because we have 20 minutes left and we have a hard cutoff at 10 to 10 because the room needs to be set up. Sorry? 9:50, right. What's left on our agenda?
our process questions, but that's not urgent, and then like anything the RPC wants to raise. So, do you need time on the agenda?
So can we use 5 minutes productively for this topic? For the one that we were just on, and then leave 15 minutes for the rest? Okay.
I think so. I want to make one comment. So I think we should just make this work, right? You shouldn't make it overly complicated. But I think the way it's defined, there is actually a role for the Rsab to be the place where the RPC can raise issues, and then the Rsab can provide feedback what's policy related and not, right? So having these issues, list of issues presented here, and then go afterwards to the RSWG with maybe a smaller list if that's possible, I think is the right process. John, are you able to provide any kind of list?
Right, I agree with that. As long as the, you know, the RPC is asking, then we have a role. But the RPC gets first crack, and I still think it would be good for John to inform the RSWG about the sorts of things that are going on. But again, that's, you know, Elliot's personal opinion, nothing more.
So I think that the one reason why it's useful to go the step over the Rsab is because if you go to the community group, people will jump on everything, right? They will not consider the question first if this is policy or not policy related. And it's not like that I want to kind of like hide anything there, but I want to like make sure we have the discussion doesn't go out of control completely from the beginning. So being a little bit careful here might be useful, I think.
Miria,
Here,
I think it's for the
up to the chairs of the RSWG how they're going to handle things, but that's a chair management issue and a working group management issue for Eric and Pete, and they're very qualified to handle that, I think.
Definitely, and that's a good point. So when we go through this list, I think you both should be invited and be here.
Okay. Do you want to make an attempt to summarize for the minutes what we discussed and maybe decided?
Yes, so what my understanding is, and let's start with the second point here first, that we just invite John for the time being to join our meetings and raise any kind of issues that might come up, and therefore thereby fulfill at least kind of informally this oversight role. And we also discussed that any kind of brain dump John wants to make, we go through this group as a first step and then decide about how to move on next meeting probably. And then for the change management team, I think we will officially kind of resolve this team at this point because that was chartered by RSOC. But the RPC can start a new team, and we are happy to send a liaison to that team if you would like that.
Okay.
Anything
Let's-
else on this
I
topic?
think that was that matched my view of what we had talked about. Thank you.
Okay.
Do you
perfect.
want to move to the next agenda item? Document approval. We don't necessarily need to talk about this for a long time because there isn't any documents yet. I hope we won't see a level of documents that would require us to have data tracker support in place. So I think we can maybe do it by email.
So I don't know. Did you invite Robert to the meeting at the end?
Robert is online.
He's online. Perfect. Because like my understanding was that actually kind of setting up this thing similar to like other groups is like probably not a lot of effort, and like if we can just have it, we probably should just do it also for transparency reasons in the data tracker. But Robert,
Am
you
I
might
welcome
want
to provide input?
Yes, please.
So it is on my plan to add balloting, and I do think that you're going to need it because the one of the things that I think are going to come through RSWG that are going to require careful analysis for approval are the updates to the documents that define the grammar and the rendering formats.
What's your view on the level of effort required to get this tooling done? Are we talking minutes, days, weeks?
It's not weeks. It's maybe a day. We did the bulk of the work when we added balloting to the IRTF, to the IRSG. And I want to, the only reason this isn't just half a day's work is I want to refactor that a little bit to improve the quality of the code that is supporting the ballots. But really, this is a day or a day or two effort.
Okay, so that is great to hear. I think then let's use the data tracker since we have it. And my feeling is we could probably, if we have this in place by 1:15, that'll be soon enough, right? We don't need it any sooner than that. I don't expect the RSWG to have anything to approve for us before 1:15.
Yeah, probably not.
So you have some time. You can
Yeah, I
prioritize it
think there's
accordingly.
time.
Thanks, Robert.
So I mean, the other thing is
I think also just for the for the purposes of visibility, it's good to have this in the data tracker from the beginning, rather than have some things hidden in email discussion, which tends to get lost and isn't very visible to the community.
Yep. The other thing is like how we want to handle the balloting in process itself. And I think we should, because like there's not many documents to expect, so I think we should just try to actually handle those documents very quickly. And I would propose that as soon as we get a request, we just have a 1 week deadline or whatever. Can discuss that to get the ballots in, and probably we can also do this by email, except there is a perceived need for a discussion, and then we have to quickly schedule a call.
Can anybody remind me if the RFC says anything about how we're supposed to approve? Do all RSAP members need a ballot for something to pass, or can there be vacancies on the ballot because people take vacations and stuff?
Pete is looking this up first, but like
I
my memory
I
is
agree
I
with the
think
1 week, but it might like lead to practical difficulties, right? Especially
that's
during
true.
the summer period or something like that.
So I think all have to ballot, and I think there's even a deadline in the draft, something like 4 weeks maybe actually.
There's consultation as well. Is that separate to this balloting process?
Oh right, I
Forget-
forgot this. Yeah. Oops. Okay, then forget what I proposed.
I mean,
So for the
it sounds like we should perhaps, the tools team should perhaps go through and figure out a suggested process and how it can be sort of reflected into the data tracker, and then we can check that it matches what's in the RFC. Because there might be multiple stages if you want to collect review feedback before balloting, for example.
Yeah. Yeah, please.
It does not say that all of you need to ballot. It simply says that the members are expected to participate in the discussions and then are asked to ballot. And if there is still a concern outstanding, then 3 people voting yes approves
Okay.
it.
That seems reasonable. But yeah, I think Robert, as you're going to look at this document pretty in detail over the next couple of weeks, maybe propose a way how you would support the process in the RFC with tooling, and we'll discuss it then in a future meeting.
So it's not only the tooling, it's also, for example, and like I forgot this community feedback step, but it's also the question, can we kind of, when we get a publication process, can we just go immediately into community feedback, or do we need to do our reviews first? Where do we send community feedback? Is that a per document decision, or do we have like a basic set that we usually send this to?
So I would propose we use last call, since that's the mailing list that we have.
So
for these
I
sort
think
of
there is a
things.
minimum set defined in the RFC, but we could always decide to send it to more lists.
Correct. Correct. The minimum.
No.
The minimum is RFC interest.
Yep.
But as far as I can tell, it is your judgment where to send it beyond RFC interest.
Okay, and I would suggest we parallelize our review with the community review.
So, I mean, if you look at the ISG process, usually there's first an AD review and then you go into IETF last call, right? So I'm wondering if we want anything like that.
So for the ISG, it makes sense because typically the ISG hasn't seen the documents before they hit the ISG. An area director might have, right? But here, the RSAB people are supposed to participate in the RSWG basically continuously, right? So we should already know what's in those documents before they get to us. And so I think, parallelizing the community last call review, consultation, whatever you want to call it, and our review seems doable and might save some time.
So let me say one more thing. I think I agree with you, but so what I did in my AD reviews usually is like checking kind of some of the formal stuff, like are the ANA considerations correct or whatever, because it's good to catch these things before community review.
Correct, but as I said, right, we should already know what's in those documents.
Yeah, but that's not about the content. It's about kind of formal things that are missing somewhere that you actually have to like look and read at the details. But I don't think that there might be many of these issues, and if these issues come up, we can still change what we want to do.
So you're saying you want to do an internal RSAB review by some RSAB members first, and then go to community review?
I'm not
and
sure
then
if I'm
ballot?
proposing
Okay.
that, but one way would be to kind of assign an RSAB shepherd or whatever, and that shepherd then decides that the document is ready for external review. Yes.
Okay, this is Elliot.
Elliot, can we take Pete quickly and then we go through the rest of the queue?
So this is Pete. I just want to read you what 9280 says about this, because this doesn't quite track with what you're saying. So once consensus is established in the RSWG, and that all happens, the RSAB shall issue community call for comments. If substantial comments are received in response to community call for comments, the RSAB may return the proposal to the RSWG to consider these comments and make revisions. In parallel with the community call for comments, the RSAB itself shall also consider the proposal. If the scope of the revisions made in the previous step is substantial, an additional community call will be made. once the RSWG chairs confirm that the concerns received during the community calls for comments have been addressed, they shall inform the RSAB that the document is ready for balloting by the RSAB. So in effect, that sounds like Ecker and I make the call on whether we're done. So you all can make comments to us
Perfect.
during that period. You can evaluate the document. The community can make those comments. We evaluate, we're done, then you go to balloting.
But like this group is starting the community call, right?
You start the
Yes.
community call, and if there's significant changes, you can start another one.
Right.
But then we, as the WG chairs, make the call that it's ready for ballot,
Got it.
then you go.
So this might mean that there's a bit more work for Robert, because I don't think any other balloting has this ping pong thing. But I think since we have 8 minutes left, I think the proposal is for Robert and the tools team to take a look at the RFC, propose a tools supported balloting approach that implements what the RFC says, and present it here for consideration, and probably also in RSWG, because they have a role as well.
So Elliot and Colin, you've been in the queue, but not anymore.
Yeah, I just wanted to add one quick comment about the timing, right? Which is, in terms of the amount of time it takes to ballot, the program actually looked at that, and I think there were various versions that discussed how long things would take. The only reason there isn't a specific time in there is because maybe some proposals require a bit more consultation within the streams. So if something's going to have a major impact on the IETF, for instance, then it may be that the Rsab member wants to consult colleagues to get views. And in fact, it's even possible for the streams to establish policies around this. But let's not abuse the notion of reasonable time in terms of how long it takes to ballot. And also, I just want to note that there's sort of several rounds of potential balloting, right? So the first round is, yes, concern, whatever. And if the concerns aren't resolved, right, it's possible that balloting will change. And that's the intent of the concern, is that concerns get addressed, and hopefully by the end there are no concerns. But it may take several rounds of back and forth in order to address that. Again, the way this was envisioned was that the Rsab members shouldn't surprise anybody where possible, and that this should come up, during the RSWG wherever possible. But when that doesn't happen, probably some negotiations will occur in order to try and resolve concerns. And I just want to mention that level of, it's very similar to a discuss in that way, that eventually they're meant to be cleared, but after some period of time, you just count heads.
Okay, we have 5 minutes, and I think we want to move on to the next.
I want to give Colin a chance if he wants to comment.
No, I had nothing. I just can't look.
So I think I want to propose now that we assign an Rsab shepherd to every document, because it's also, I think we need one dedicated person to follow up with the comments and just who feels responsible to move the document forward. But I think you're right that we need some kind of tool spec from Robert, and then we can move on with the discussion. So Robert, are you able to write something down, or do you need more support at this point?
No, I don't need more support.
Robert had some networking problems earlier. I don't know if he's back.
He said no, right? Okay,
I couldn't hear anything. Okay.
Then we just wait for your input. Thank you.
All
Okay.
right. RPC, Sandy, anything? Excellent. You're saving us some time. That is great.
But let me say one thing. Please feel free when you have any issues to just send them to the mailing list or put them directly on the agenda. This is really just to help you.
Is there anything else, Cindy? Do we have any other business? I think Pete had a point that we can maybe do in 4 minutes.
I hope so. A dumb one, but one that has to be dealt with. Ecker and I were preparing slides for RSWG and realized that we stuck the note well on as per the template and read the note well and went, oh crap. That note well says lots of things about the IETF, which this group is not part of. I would be happy to get a recommendation from you all about what we should say in there, or whether we should rip it out, or because officially we're following the IETF anti-harassment policy, we're following the IETF IPR policy, because all documents that are drafts submitted are going to have the appropriate copyright templates on them. Someone files a patent in RSWG, I don't know what we're going to do, but we probably should have something at the top of the slides. I don't think either of us care what it is, but we would take recommendations on what the right thing to do here is.
As you say, I think it does apply, but I think you just want to remove the word IETF here and then use the same text, but it might also be just a question for the group itself.
Yeah, I mean, this is a problem we have in the IRTF as well. And for the note well and the IPR, we have a statement that the policy applies, substituting IETF, IRTF, IETF throughout. But I'm not convinced that works very well. And I'm hesitant to suggest reopening the IPR RFCs, but reopening them and just doing the textual search and replace might not be a terrible thing to clarify them. But yeah, this is something we need to work out for the IRTF as well as the RSWG.
So this is Elliot. The RFC actually speaks to this. The first sentence of section 3.1.1.2 says all interested individuals are welcome to participate in the RSWG. Participants are subject to the anti-harassment policies described in section 3.2.5. And those are present in, you can then see the policy stated in section 3.2.5, where it says the IETF anti-harassment policy applies to the RSWG and Rsab. And so that's what you can include on your slide.
So,
Right.
no,
but the same thing with the IRTF, which is that the IRTF documents say something similar, and then you go read the anti-harassment policy, and it says it only applies to the IETF. Similarly for the IPR statements and so on. Again, the IRTF and presumably the RSWG documents say they apply, and then if you read the actual RFC, it only talks about IETF. So there's some clarifications that might be needed.
So I think there are two questions: what the RFCs ought to say and what these slides ought to say. Looking at the slides, there appear to be three categories of material. There's the anti-harassment policy, which I think we've effectively, whatever the documents like specifically say, we've patched them so that they say the IETF anti-harassment policy applies, so we can put that in just fine. Then there is the IPR policies, which 9280 is silent on, regrettably. And then there are the policies that are involved participating in the meeting at all, like giving your, like the part about, acknowledging them, make a photographic record and personal information you give the IETF. And I think those should remain the way they are, because you actually can't come to this meeting right now without participating in the IETF. And so, like, as a practical matter, those are the rules, regardless of whether or not, like, what 9280 says. So my inclination is to do some light editing on this and remove the IPR section, because the IPR section does not apply at all. I think it was an oversight 9280, but nevertheless, it's the state of play.
You can't remove the IPR section because work in the RSWG will happen via internet drafts, and they are submitted under BCP 97
that may be true, but it doesn't mean the statements in the microphone are subject to it. I agree this is an oversight. I'm just trying to figure out what to do.
So it's not only the documents, it's like any comments made to an air director at a microphone or in an ITF setting fall under the note well, and air directors will be in that room. So it's not having the IPR policy apply will just make it very confusing.
So are people suggesting I should not edit this note well slide essentially at all?
I didn't catch that.
Are you suggesting I not edit the slide essentially at all, which certainly is
I think
clear?
I would suggest that the full note well applies.
Why don't we show the slide as it is, and then I'll put an agenda item to adjust for the working group to adjust if they wish to.
I think that's the right thing to do. But I think I also agree to Lars, like if you are at an IETF meeting, it actually applies. And if you have an interim which is outside of the IETF meeting, it might be different, but I think you don't want to treat that differently.
I agree substantively. I'm just trying to figure out what the text actually says.
And we're 1 minute over. Thank you all.
Yeah, special thanks to RSOC for your service and everybody who's serving in future in this setup.
See you at RSWG.
Bye.
dispatch? Are you going to,
I'm gonna see what the agenda is in CFOG first.
that's